6:01. I'm ready. All right, it's 6 o'clock and we're ready to start our Citizens Climate Action Committee meeting. With our secretary to take an attendance of all who's present and verify that we have enough for a quorum, please.
I believe we have John Nix, Jennifer Kip Searcy, myself, James Fulton, Carly Muir,
Jackie Davis.
Jackie Dennis, Stephen Hofstetter, Jeannie Ford, and Eric Walters. I believe we do have a quorum.
Thank you. Next, we'll have since we have a quorum, we'll go ahead and have an approval for our agenda. I ask for a motion for approval of the agenda.
I'll move. Jackie Davis.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
I second that.
Any discussion? With no discussion, all in favor? Say aye.
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 Against? Abstentions? Okay, our agenda has been approved as supplied to us. Next, we'll move to the review and approval of our September 19th, 2022 meetings. I offer up for a motion of approval of these minutes.
I'll move again.
Okay, it's been moved. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, it's been moved in second. Any discussion? Hearing no discussion, of all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? Abstentions? All right, we've moved to approve our September 19th minutes. Next, we're going to move to our agenda where we get a chance to welcome and meet our new members. At this time, we're going to take a minute and have them introduce themselves and tell us a few things about them. First of all, I want to welcome you. I think that it's a great opportunity to meet all of you and get some new thoughts and new ideas on our committee. So let's start out. We'll start out with you, Danny.
Hi, I'm Danny Cucciara. Currently I work in gene therapy, but my doctorate is in environmental and global health from the College of Public Health here at UF. And a lot of that was focused on being in public health, disadvantaged communities and how the environment affects them. Climate change is also an interest of mine. So I decided to be here.
And we're really glad to have you and have your perspective from a health standpoint. Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right. So next, let's go.
Hi, thank you, John. I'm Terry Herpold. I'm an English professor at UF, and my field of research and teaching is what we call environmental humanities. So it's the intersection, literature, film, and art with the study, scientific and otherwise, of environmental crisis and environmental sustainability and the relation of humans to the more than human world. I also I've been a Gainesville resident for 20 years, so I feel pretty invested in the community and very honored to have a chance to serve. I also run an initiative at UF called Imagining Climate Change, which has, for the last 5 years, created a venue where scientists and humanists can get together to have conversations, to exchange ideas. We run seminars and colloquia and performances and readings and film screenings and the like, trying to create a place on the university, but also in the wider community where people who are deeply concerned about the ongoing crisis can hear like-minded folk who can speak to them directly. So it doesn't have to be only scientists or agronomists or people working in architecture, sustainability, and so on. We're trying to create a genuinely interdisciplinary place, and we've been doing that for several years. It's been quite successful. And we run volunteer tree plantings too. So we do a lot of tree plantings in the surroundings communities about 4 times a semester. It's quite an exciting thing to spend a Saturday morning with a bunch of young people planting trees. So that's what I do.
Well, great. Well, we're really pleased to have you. And, with that type of experience, Terry and also Danny, being able to do outreach is where we really want to go and make sure that our plan always takes into account our community and input from our community. So we're glad to have you guys. So next, we'll have Nathan. Would you introduce yourself, please?
Of course. Wow. This is incredible. I just got here, so sorry I'm a little bit late. Nice to meet all of you. My name is Nathan Fox. I'm happy to be here with, it sounds like, some really awesome people on this committee. I hail from St. Louis, Missouri originally, and I haven't been in Gainesville more than 2 years at this point. But I see a lot of potential here. It's a really, really cool place. A lot of really, with the university here, a lot of awesome, smart people, a lot of good academics. Currently, I go to Santa Fe College. I'm studying to be an electrician. I work for a solar company. I work at Solar Impact, and I just switched from being a national park ranger. So I was a park ranger at several different parks for the last 4 years. Before that, I got a couple of degrees from a little school in Missouri called Westminster, biology and philosophy, that kind of stuff. So climate change is a real passion of mine. It's something I've talked about extensively in several different forms, both for the National Park Service and otherwise. Usually to kids. I do a lot of kids education, or have in the past. So I'm glad to be joining you all, and looking forward to being more involved in the community. So
well, great. We're really glad to have you too, and especially with your. I'm very familiar with Solar Impact, and it's been a leader in solar implementation in our community, and it's real nice to have you.
sure, certainly, yeah.
Okay, let's sort of introduce ourselves to them. First of all, I'm John Nix. I was vice chair and now moved into chair. I've been on this committee for 2 years. It'll be my 3rd year, final year. And my day job is I retired from the utility industry after 35 years, working there as an energy engineer, implementing a lot of our energy conservation programs. And I specialized in the air conditioning, ventilation, and heating industry. And currently I'm working with the school district as the energy conservation engineer at the school. And I also do serve on several other boards, including Keep Alachua County Beautiful, our Friends of Coscowilla, and also the ASHRAE, American Society of Heating and Engineer board. And to my left here is our vice chair. Would you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's great to have the new members on board. To see you all. My name's Jennison Kip Cersei. I use Jennison Kip in my work and Cersei in my personal life. So just so you know. And what's that? Which is this is both, I guess. Yeah, they're very blurry boundaries, if any, between the two when it comes to climate change, for sure. I have been a Gainesville resident for close to 17 years. It'll be 17 years in January. My academic background is in applied environmental engineering and environmental economics. And so I've always been someone who's trying to bridge the science and action, gaps. And in terms of climate change has been a common thread throughout my career since the late 90s, I'd say. And I've worked at the University of Florida since I moved here in 2006. So my current title is I'm a Sustainable Communities Extension Specialist. And so I work with the Program for Resource Efficient Communities. And we work with large land developers in Florida to try to push the envelope with sustainability and actually measure performance moving in the right direction. But also we work on climate resilience, low impact development, kind of whole slew of things. And I'm starting my third year on the committee, and I was appointed or selected for a 2-year committee for 2 years on this committee. And then I applied to renew. So this is my first of 2 more years on the committee. And this was like the first chance that I've been able to apply the work around climate action in my own community. It was such a great opportunity because I do work all around the state, but then I come home and think, I'd like to be more engaged in my own community. And so we have a lot of challenges ahead of us, but I was just telling someone the other day, it's the people I work with who keep me going. And I would include you all on that because climate is difficult. I'm a co-chair of what's called the National Extension Climate Initiative. We founded this group 3 years ago, and we have over 600 members. So we're a network of faculty across the country. We're affiliated with the outreach extension arm of the universities and trying to work to advance climate solutions, especially with climate justice at the center. So.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's great to meet everyone. So my name is Adam Despang. My background spent about 5 years in the Army before coming back to Gainesville to get a business degree. And most recently, my work has been with a small national security think tank, educating communities on the national security implications of climate change. The work takes me around Florida, and this committee is kind of giving me a chance to work locally. So, and nice to meet you all.
Okay.
I'm Jackie Davis. I'm retired from a career as a midwife in a hospital-based practice. So what I bring to this committee is more being part of the community. Since I retired, I've been very active with the Community Remembrance Project, which is a group that honors victims of lynching in our community and recognizes them. And through that work, I've met people from all over the county. And so I feel like, when we do community things that's where I'll be able to add. I can't add the crunchy stuff, but I can do
Right.
that. I'm a member of the NAACP ECJC, the Environmental Climate Justice Committee. And then at my church, the United Church of Gainesville, we've just started a creation care and climate justice task force, and I'm part of that. So.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, a common thread that I hear here, and it is the foundation of our committee, is community outreach. And as we get into looking at our work plan, you'll find that that's where our foundation is. And then looking at disadvantaged communities and from the standpoint of who will have the greatest impact of climate change. So we're glad that we see this common thread among our new members and with our members, that we're community outreach orientated. So sounds like we got a good group here. All right, speaking. Oh, I'm sorry.
And my name is
Yeah.
James Fulton. I am a research scientist with the Florida Department of Agriculture. I've this year started the Honeybee Diagnostics Research Lab, where we diagnose honeybee diseases. And my PhD was in plant pathology, One thing that we studied was the impact of climate change on spreading or emerging diseases affecting agriculture. Before that, I was in the Peace Corps in Guatemala, where I served 2 years working in poverty-stricken areas, hoping to address issues of malnutrition. And then previous to that, I was in AmeriCorps and CCC, where I was responding to Hurricane Katrina relief in New Orleans. So
Great. Well, thank you, James. And by no means I meant to leave you out there, but you're just too close. I'm also involved with agriculture. I'm a fourth generation rancher, and I really think that as we get close to our environment, nothing affects us more in climate change than agriculture and our food supply. So we're all glad to have you here with us, James. Okay, looking at our agenda now, the next thing that we need to finalize, Steve has given us all a copy of our annual work plan. And if we could take a look at that. And if there's any discussion on that, let's do that. We'd like to especially pay attention to our goals for the year 2023. Did everyone get a chance to at least to look at this? Okay. I'm gonna open this up for discussion, and I'd like to just start with the beginning here. You know, we were established in 2020, and our responsibilities, the purpose is to provide an opportunity for citizens' involvement in climate change issues and concerns affecting Alachua County and Gainesville and surrounding municipalities. So that's our purpose. And it gave us like at least 3 areas on how to do that. And my key words here are: we're supposed to advise the Joint Water and Climate Policy Board. And in my 2 years, one of the things that always we have to keep in mind is that we are an advisory board only. We don't set policy, we only advise on policy. And the second thing this is saying is that we're here to also to engage relevant stakeholders, agencies, nonprofit, and community. We're here to engage them. And it sounds like we have a lot of people with experience on how to do that. And thirdly, this is saying that the committee is to assist the county, Gainesville, and other municipalities in Alachua County in the promotion of a greater community awareness. And that's telling the community. I like to talk to them from where they are. How does it affect you? Working backward, reducing your electric bill, making sure that there's no flooding in your community, making sure that there's resiliency during hurricane. So reaching people where they are, and then relating that to climate change. Rather than going from climate change to them, let's go to what affects them and then relate it to what climate change is. So these were our responsibilities. Next, you can read through and see some of our major accomplishments. Are there any questions or any discussion on the accomplishments?
Are you talking about 2022 or the things on the back, 2023?
We're going through 2022 right now,
Oh, okay.
and then we'll go to our goals. So these were some of the things that we actually accomplished, and I was kind of a part of that. One of the things that we're still working on is our vulnerability analysis, and that was very interested in it brought out a lot of things. We had several presentations from the UAB is the UAB, the Utility Advisory Board, had many discussions with GRU and bringing GRU into the plan. We identified one of the big things that if you go to documents that we have, we identified high-risk impacts and what they were for our region. So Steve has put into our folders all the things that were listed there, and I'd advise you to take a look at those, and you can really get caught up on looking at the direct information that's associated with these things. So now going to our goals for 2023, you see the number one there is to establish relationships with the identified community groups. So one of the things we also did is we put a list together of groups that we thought we need to identify with. And that information is also in your information package. So, and then let's add groups that you guys might come up with as new members. So let me open this up to you guys as we look at these goals. Another one I just want to highlight is to help coordinate a climate summit to educate policymakers and gain impact feedback from citizens. So that's something that Steve's working on, is trying to put together that summit so that we can let the community and policymakers know what we're doing, but mainly to get their feedback on what they would like from us. All right, you guys. Jensen?
First, I would say you weren't just a little bit involved in that, John. You were very involved in the accomplishments, and we appreciate your leadership on that. I think I just wanted to comment related to the climate summit that, that ties directly, obviously, with the community engagement, with the idea of, equity and justice being at the center, that we've had lots of discussions over the 2 years about listening first, meeting people where they're at, understanding, their perspectives and the realities of their world as it's being shaped by climate change, whether you say that or not today. And not just to understand vulnerabilities, but also to help understand the assets in our community, the people who are already doing this work every day, and the resources and the people we want to leverage to try to move climate action forward. And as John said, we're in an advisory role, so we ourselves cannot change the policy, but we certainly can make, I would highlight actually, in addition to what John said, the bold and innovative strategies, policies, and target goals is what this group was founded to do. So we kind of have some freedoms in that we're an advisory board who can think big and, don't rule something out just because it hasn't already been done or it's a political or financial uphill battle. I mean, I think that's our job, to think bold. So throw, any ideas you have on the table as creative or as outlandish, imagining climate solutions. I'll call this, Terry. It's our opportunity to do that. So, yeah, I would add that, but.
Okay, so I think just with, each of these items, I think the goals are great.
Okay.
I just wonder, are we going to more clearly delineate how we're going to go about each of these? Or assign them to folks, or how do we want to actually accomplish these?
I agree. And I'm leaning toward people looking at these goals and then telling me or telling the committee what you'd like to work on. I truly believe in putting people where they want to be put and where they think their skills are.
Are we going to create task forces then for each of these points?
I think that would be a good
Okay.
way to do it. And we can, I'll get with Steve and we can kind of break these down. And then we can, as a group, decide where and how we want to work on these.
So for the new members here, it might be worthwhile to mention the sunshine law.
Mhm.
Just the limitations that we have for direct communication between one another. It essentially requires that we work through Stephen here for any topic or information pertaining to the committee.
That's definitely a suggested item for number 8 for our next meeting.
Mhm.
That is something that's very important. And it did reduce to some degree some of the things in the ways we had to do things in the past.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would add that, I know it's on the agenda for December, right? But this idea of creating task forces or teams or action teams where each of us as individuals can serve on one of those, and then we can effectively be like liaisons with the community around that particular piece. So I think it's a really good question you raise, Adam, and that, you know, in our work plan and as we do this, kind of like, I think of it as setting the table, the dinner table. We know we're going to need seats, certain roles being filled at that table, and so we can fill that role, but we need to be bolstered and, you know, expand our capacity with citizens out there who are wanting to do something, since we can't work together outside of these meetings. So I think that's where the summit could come into play, trying to help build those connections.
Is there a way to create a conceptual model showing which of these may lead into the climate summit? For example, establishing relationships with identified community groups would be an input to the summit, because we want to make sure that these groups are invited and included in the summit. And so it might be helpful to create a flow chart, at least for myself, thinking of in terms of what steps might need to be accomplished before we get to the climate zone.
Right, and we had started doing that. I know that Steve had some suggestions, and I think that that's what we, you know, can do. We can set some goals for the summit, and then figure out how and who we should have at the table. And we might even put what we call our guest panel to make sure that there's certain people there that might make sure that we get our base information or our foundation information, similar to what we did with the Green Jobs panel. Just making sure that we have certain people there at that at the summit. And Stephen, if you have some ideas on the summit, please let's talk about them now.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Steve Hofstadter, I'm the county liaison for the committee. So if you do have any information you would like to provide to the rest of the committee members, you would send it to me. I would send it out to everyone. When I email everyone, I blind copy, so you can't accidentally interact with each other. Basically, you can tell everyone else something outside of the meeting, they cannot respond to you. So by going through me, I'm preventing that from happening. So it is a painful process. We've had some people really struggle with it, and you'll find it frustrating. So one thing we can do is we can create subcommittees to target some of these things, and then have one of you as the point person out of that committee that can then go out to the public and communicate what we're trying to accomplish. Betsy Riley, our sustainability manager, and we've already started to gather up information for the summit. We have other staff as well. So we're going to try to create an outline, a time frame of when we think the summit could take place based on our goals of completing the vulnerability analysis first. There's some things we need to accomplish before we put on the summit. So we're going to try to gather that information up, set kind of some strategies and goals, and then bring that to you all for the input. We can, we won't finalize anything until we've had that exchange of information and kind of talk through those items.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yes, Jake.
I just had some questions about the planning for the summit. As I mentioned, I'm part of NAACP ECJC, which you mentioned just put on that really successful Green Jobs Pipeline Conference. And ECJC is planning to do a similar kind of summit and would love to partner and do it together. But they would want to be in on the planning committee. The chair of ECJC is Ikwanda Ja, and she and I just got back from the Climate Reality Project conference in Houston. And we really have a lot of ideas from going to that conference, of course, about things that we'd like to see and things that we think the community would be more interested in. So I would hope that you would include community members from the beginning, rather than come up with a plan and then offer it to community members. I think we need community members on the planning committee.
Yeah, one thing, I will do that. We're trying to just, like, for instance, if you said, let's do it in April, I would say, we won't have the vulnerability analysis done. Let's push it back. So there's some parameters that we want to make sure we have covered before that way you kind of have an idea.
Right. ECJC is talking about doing it in May.
Okay.
So
That is a tight timeline because I think the vulnerability analysis comes out in April. And so if it gets bumped back, we could have an issue with that aspect because, one of our main goals is to educate the policymakers on climate issues to develop toward our development of a climate action plan. And that vulnerability analysis, that critical key to explain how we're being impacted locally by climate. So we wouldn't want it before then, but there's no reason why we can't work it out. Plus, we could have 2 steps, 3 steps. We could have multiple aspects of this summit and tie these activities together.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So
and we would welcome, the Sierra Club, other organizations to give us input also. We definitely, one of our goals here is to definitely involve all the community organizations and make them a part of the summit and other activities that we're doing.
I think it is, just right now we're, tomorrow's election day. And I really did not hear the candidates talking a lot about renewable energy, except when I asked them specifically about it. And I feel like it's really important for us to educate the community so that every single election, every single candidate gets asked that a lot, and I think the community will, as soon as they know that's important. So I just don't want to, wait.
May I ask a sort of long view question? Is the plan here to begin a series of such summits going forward? In other words, the 2023 might be the first and have another one in 24 or 25, maybe grow them in terms of representation and participation. So that's the question I'm asking, and I'm getting a lot of nods here, which suggesting, we want to do more than one of these, obviously. And I think that one of the crucial sort of programmatic or planning questions then is, how much do you bite off in the first year? In other words, you want to be ambitious, you want to go big, but do we set certain parameters on the scale and the number of people involved or the number of sort of threads of discussion involved in the first year to ensure that we can pull it off with success and with plural representation of all the community groups involved, but with the understanding that the first time you do something like this, it's going to be maybe limited in resources and participation. And what you want to do is have a success that then feeds into the following years. I'm not proposing any particular method for achieving this, but it does occur to me, as I mentioned before the meeting began, I was just down in Sarasota and the sustainability workshop, Sustainable Communities Workshop. This was their 17th year. And I did have a chance to talk with some of the people running it, and they followed this trajectory. They built up something that became bigger and bigger until it was actually quite quite substantial by now, it might make sense for us to think carefully about how big we want to go, get maximum return on the investment of time and effort, with the goal of making it a fixture in the community every year or every 2 years.
I think that's a great idea. And also right now, because of the Inflation Reduction Act,
Mhm.
the community is very, very interested.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody's saying you could get 2,000 off for converting from oil burner to
Right.
air heat pump, that's what the community wants to hear.
Right.
And so I feel like I think we will get overwhelming participation from the community even this year.
Certainly, if you, I mean, again, I don't mean to necessarily say that the Sarasota event is the model for us, but one of the things that ran through the entire event was recurring presentations on the IRA and its benefits, especially for the working poor, for communities of color and other marginalized people. And the general assessment was, so long as the incoming Congress doesn't undo the work that's been accomplished already, the general assessment was that it could be actually genuinely transformative. That's the kind of conversation. This gets back to what you said, John. That's the kind of conversation that we want to have to reach people where they are. If we talk to them with sort of highfalutin ideas about the ethics of climate crisis and the long-term view, those are important conversations to have. We underestimate the ability of people to think at that very high level. They really do. They are capable of it, and they want to think about that way with regard to their children's and grandchildren's futures and so on. But if we focus on these are rewards, I don't mean in the financial sense, but these are benefits that accrue immediately from the changes that are going on. We have two effects of that, both of which are salutary. The first one is that, again, we reach people where they live. They say, oh, I could save this money, and then I have that money to do other things that make my life more valuable, make the lives of my family more valuable, my community more valuable. The second thing and this was also iterated multiple times at this meeting I was just at last weekend, the more we get the IRA plugged into the communities and we see the immediate benefits, the less likely it is to be undone by a future national administration, federal administration. And the analogy was often made about the Affordable Care Act, that once it became clear what the benefits were to communities all over the nation, including communities who might have opposed it to begin with because they could not see the benefits, the harder it became to undo that. And if the IRA is generally going to be a transformative event in the history of sustainability and resilience in this nation, we need to start using it. And I agree that could be a focus of what we might do.
Yeah, and the Justice 40. Which
Yeah, absolutely. I
targets-
mean, there's so many elements of that feed into everything we've been speaking about here.
So real quick, I just want to make one note. These meetings have a tendency to run over the 2-hour time. So it's important to try to be concise
Sorry.
with our points, just so we can get through everything together, since we only meet once a month. And so we have enough time for public comment at the end as well.
Good point. Okay. So do you have anything to add?
Well, and I mean, maybe this is better for next time as we go through things. But yeah, I mean, having the subcommittees or points of contact within the committee for each of these items, I think we should identify that. And then some of these pertain to everyone. And so maybe it's something we can come back with next time. So if I go line by line, the first one, establish relationships with identified community groups. We all have our respective relationships. So maybe next time we can come back with those listed to include with the planning for the community meeting. The second one, I don't know if someone wants to take that on, but maybe we can have someone look at what that platform might be to best communicate our events. I don't know if anyone's tech savvy.
I'm tech savvy.
So maybe that's something. Would you like to take that on? Chair, is that-
So we're I don't want to sign things right now,
Yeah.
but let's look at it and then come back and let us know where you might want to fit in. Okay, just on the summit, to sum this up, the purpose of this, we got to remember what our job is. Our job is to come up with a strategic plan. The purpose, one of the goals of the summit is to get input that would allow us to come up with a strategic plan to recommend. So we're gonna get input into what's important to the community. And we want to make sure that as we put our plan together and recommend it to the Joint Water and Climate Committee, that we can use the data that we collect from the summit as some of the foundations of our recommendations. So our goal is to come up with that strategic plan. And this summit is a way of collecting data that will support some of the things that we recommend. Thank you. All right. Steve, how would you like us to formalize our approval of the plan?
Yeah, I think that maybe the best step is to identify anything you want to edit or change to this document, any edits, modifications. If you don't feel like there's anything that needs to be changed, you can make a motion to approve. If anyone does have any edits, we may want to, if they're minor, we might want to do them right now. So that ideally, if we can approve this today, then I can send it to the board by their meeting in December. And typically, we try to have these annual reports done by the end of the calendar year. Every committee for the county submits one of these annually. So this is kind of the format you typically see. So if you have any edits to this document, that's what I would suggest.
Do we want to have anything that's specific for these goals? For example, working with staff to interpret the cities and counties' greenhouse gas emissions inventories. What do we mean by working with? Does that mean having conversations? Does that mean having meetings? Does that mean, is there value in making this more specific? Because these are somewhat general and broad.
And Steve, I know in the past, we tried to, when we delivered something to the commissioners, we usually did it in steps. So this is like the first step of the areas that we wanted to look in, and then we'll have an opportunity to fill this in, right?
Yeah.
That's the way we've done it in the past. These are just the broad areas that we want to look at.
And will they be uncovered by the Jones-Edmonds study?
Yes,
So that's,
supported, yes.
seems like this, we're just waiting on that, and then it'll be very clear
Mhm.
where.
Where we need to focus.
Can I
Right.
ask a quick question? What is the Jones-Edmonds study? I'm sorry.
Go
Oh,
ahead.
so that's the vulnerability study.
Yeah, it's a
Oh.
countywide vulnerability analysis, looking at all kinds of factors related to climate, mainly flooding,
Okay.
storm, but it's heat, it's ag, looking at all these factors, and we're expecting the report to be completed in March. We've
Great.
had qualitative reports from them as to
Right.
the areas of concern, but the quantitative data we should have in March of this year. That gives us kind of that background base of what we expect to happen in our community over the next 30, 70 years.
So this is the consequence side of climate change. Like, so this is if Alachua County starts to heat up, this is what's going to start to happen. It's what the different aspects of your lives are going to change because there's more water, there's more heat, certain areas,
Yeah.
different rain cycles. Is that
Based on
same
models.
as the greenhouse? Is that also included in that study, the greenhouse gas emissions? Or?
No, the greenhouse gas emissions was the current carbon emissions, greenhouse gases we're currently emitting.
Oh, okay.
The analysis is looking at the impacts of what climate change is doing to our
Right.
community.
Right.
So it's identifying infrastructure that is likely going to be impacted by climate. It's looking at changes to agriculture, changes to heat, changes to human health.
Right. So
Yeah.
we then have those greenhouse gas emissions inventories done. Like that's already done.
Yeah, isn't that in the Google Google Drive?
Yeah, if you look at the, there's a link on the bottom of your agenda.
Ah.
And
It's the folder. That
if
might
I
help me a
could-
lot.
If
Sorry
I could
about
just
that.
add a piece of
Thank you.
context for the vulnerability, it's
Yeah.
not just, what are the impacts gonna be, but given the effects, everyone's situated differently to be able to absorb or respond to those impacts. So the vulnerability takes into account a lot of other factors beyond just the climate outcomes
Right.
themselves.
Right.
It's like trying to identify where those most vulnerable groups are, groups of people,
Gotcha.
and resources. I was gonna propose a very minor addition if the committee agrees that's helpful for the work plan, and it's basically to link the establishing the relationships with the developing a plan and the engagement, and that's the proposal that I think James, I think you raised this, but basically say self-identify action teams or subcommittees with, one representative of this committee who will then work with citizens and community members to move those. Like, it's a concrete thing that I'd like to put in this plan so that we're committed to actually doing that.
And I guess what we kind of would like to say is, in general, when we delve into these areas, we will break into groups and have a representative, as you mentioned, Steve, to represent each of the categories of the subcommittees.
Okay, so am I editing the first bullet? Is that what you were referring to, or?
I think you could, by just adding at the end, establish relationships with identified community groups, comma,
Uh-huh.
or it could be its own. And self-identify leaders of subcommittees or action teams. So we each take on a role, for a different subcommittee as being the liaison with the communities outside of our meetings here, so that we have kind of ongoing work between our meetings that we can report back.
Or maybe it's assigning a committee point of contact to each goal.
That's.
Well, I want to make sure we're approving. I want to get the language that we're approving. Now I can, if you guys are comfortable with it, I can send it back to the chair to verify before officially. But what I would need then is a motion to approve the plan with the proposed changes.
I have a question. When you say subcommittees, are you talking about within this group, or are you talking about one of us with each of the many community groups that already exist?
Subcommittees or
Right.
within, so we would each
Within the
be-
group of us?
Yes,
That's- yeah.
and then we would, as individuals, like say I'm the energy equity subcommittee point person, then I would go work with community members specifically on that, and groups that are, on our list engaged in that issue outside of these meetings, and then bring what I learned back to the board,
Oh,
just so we can divide and conquer without replicating the same either community groups or issues, outside of the time that we have together here. So,
Is that also a way to manage the restrictions of the sunshine laws?
exactly,
Right, okay,
yes.
right.
So you could have subcommittee meetings, but I would have to organize them. I'd have to, put out an advertisement that you are meeting, and I need about 10 days to accomplish that. So it's cumbersome to have the subcommittees, but we can do that. But then that one person contact could be much more efficient to
Right.
communicate that out.
And say, do we have to go as formal as the subcommittees, or yes, just have a point of contact? And then when
Right.
you're want to contribute to the outreach point of contact, then you just go through Stephen with that information. And then they compile that information.
But
yeah,
if we're gonna have a summit in the spring, late spring or early summer, it seems like we need to meet more than once a month, because, you're talking
Well, and
six more
that's-
meetings,
That's
and
where one
That's what
person
Steve
could
and
be,
his group is gonna
yeah.
put stuff together and bring it to us.
and do they have the, Stephen, do you have the, I don't know, what's the word? Authority to meet with community groups as you plan this summit?
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay.
That's not an issue. I would just, if more than one of you need to talk with each other, I have to set up that meeting. We can bring community groups to the subcommittee meetings. There's no reason why the public would not or could not be engaged in the subcommittees. We've done it in the past. We went down to twice a month, sometimes once a week, when we were getting started, to have more collaboration. We can do that for maybe a short, intensive period of time. Obviously, I wouldn't want weekly meetings throughout the whole year. We'd have to get more staff, but
To be perfectly clear, like I'm what I'm proposing is that the subcommittees or action teams or points of contact be only one of us are on each of those.
Yeah,
So
you
we
just,
can hold meetings outside of these meetings as
right.
long as nobody else on the committee attends. It gives us the ability to have these ongoing conversations with citizens, but only one of us can actually be physically attending.
Maybe Jellison, I'm sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you, but I think maybe what's creating a little bit of confusion here is if we drop the language of committee and we go to something like coordinator, that a member of this committee is assigned to be the coordinator for some particular subset of responsibilities, then that person can meet with community members without any without any violation of the Sunshine Law, bring it back to this committee and say, as coordinator of X, here's my report to the committee. Coordinator of Y gives her report, right? And then that's how we learn what everybody's doing. There are ways to create feedback and cross-pollination within the committee to make that work. But if one person is appointed that I'm going to be meeting with these kinds of community members, then when she brings that data back to the committee, we've not violated sunshine laws.
Right.
And we've been able to be more effective in terms of outreach. Sort of a model I'm throwing out, so we don't have to worry about, well, 3 people are on this subcommittee, 4 people on that subcommittee, they got to meet at this time, this place.
Well,
Okay.
it seems like maybe it's different for the different tasks. I mean,
Yeah.
like clearly, we can have point people to meet with each community group and some of these things. But for a summit, we might want a subcommittee. I don't know, maybe we could decide that later on and have
No,
a coordinator for each one and then later on.
Yeah, I think the simplest thing is to avoid the subcommittees, given the complexity and the cumbersome nature of having to set up those meetings. And then create meetings as necessary from here. We don't have to make.
Doesn't sound that hard to me if you just, like we're usually the second Monday. So you could just say the subcommittee for this will meet the third Monday.
If we can, but we can set up those meetings as needed from
Yeah.
our committee here.
Sure.
Right.
We're gonna let Steve kind of bring something to us and then we'll kind of work with that. But I think
Could I make a proposal? I'm sorry, John.
Go ahead.
This will move us on, hopefully. I was going to propose specific language.
Okay.
To put in the action plan, which would be to, for each member of the CSAC or the Citizen Climate Advisory Committee will identify in a specific liaison role for or point of contact for a topical or issue area within the action plan. So, and I don't know that we need the justification or the reasoning on here. It's just what the reasoning is so that we can continue this work without violating the sunshine laws and do it, on an ongoing basis without having to schedule, with 2 weeks notice and restrictions that we know everybody has on their time and ability to get to the physical meeting place, just to help move things faster. So in a nutshell, each committee member will identify as a lead point of contact or liaison for CSAC working groups. That language
Yeah,
acceptable?
and that can be a general
Yeah.
format that we'll work from.
And anybody can say, no, that's a bad idea.
I mean, I think it could be as simple as the committee will assign point of contact for each committee goal.
Yeah, you might not want to say each member because
Yeah.
there could
Yes.
find yourself in a situation
Right.
where
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
member can't, maybe it isn't able to be
Yes.
one of those
Right.
individuals.
And if that's a concern too, we could have points of contact and alternate points of contact for each committee goal.
Okay, Steve, you feel comfortable with that language?
Yep.
Okay. Moving on, I'd like to have a motion for acceptance of the plan with the modification suggested.
I'll second that motion.
No, somebody make
Oh, I
the
can't.
motion.
We have to make the motion.
Yeah,
I'll make the motion to do that.
I'll second it.
Yeah.
All right, it's been moved in second for the approval of the plan as given to us. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing no discussion, all in favor
Aye.
and all against? Anyone abstaining? All right, so Steve, we've accepted the plan with the modifications suggested.
I'll provide you with those modifications when I get it complete, and I'll attempt to have it for the county board meeting and the joint water and climate policy board. That meets December, I believe it's 14th.
Okay.
Whatever that Monday is, that second Monday, that joint water and climate policy board meets, then we can provide them with that. We can also provide it in the notice of record for the county commission as well in their December meeting.
Okay. Sounds great. All right, moving on to our sixth item, which is a presentation from GRU on the overview of the electric grid and the constraints. A little background on that, and we have Eric here to do that for us. Eric Walters is the sustainability director for GRU, and one of the things we wanted to make sure before we came up, our plan should always encompass what is possible. So you need to know what your current situation is in order to understand where we need to go. So we thought it was very important for us to understand what the grid was like in our community, because every community is different, and the possibilities of where we can go depends on where we're at. So we thought it would be very important for our committee to understand GRU's current situation. So Eric.
Thank you, Chair. As he said, my name is Eric Walters, Interim Chief Sustainability Officer for GRU. I've been with the utility for about 19 years. My degree is in mechanical engineering. I spent the first few years in capital project management, also working on air quality control at Deerhaven, SOx, NOx, and mercury reduction. I've since done performance engineering, efficiency engineering, production management, and also I formerly was director of fuels and power business. So electric grid operations, power buying and selling of the grid, operations of the grid, compliance of the grid, as well as fuel procurement and so forth. So in this role as sustainability, there's a lot that factors into how we do business and how we're going to do business going forward. Disclaimer, it has a lot of slides, but this will go more quickly than we expected, right? What I've tried to do is condense electric grid operations down into a reasonable slide deck for you, right? That's years of experience and operations from around the world kind of condensed down. But I am going to move fairly quickly, but if you do have questions, please stop me, okay? Part of this whole role in sustainability is really looking at the future and how we, as I said, how we're going to do business. And that is with a balanced view from GRU's standpoint. So that balance is environmental stewardship, it is cost, and it is people. So people includes the community, it includes customers of GRU, it also includes employees of GRU, because all of the decisions that we make affect all of those folks. And so part of my job is to put together plans to balance that. One of my main objectives is obviously meeting the 2045 net zero resolution of the City Commission, and how GRU is going to contribute to meeting that goal. So with that, I'm going to get started. But again, if any questions or anything that you have as I go, please stop me and let me know. Okay, first a little bit about GRU. We're a municipal utility that operates a fully integrated electric power system with power production, transmission, and distribution. We have a retail territory of about 124,000, I wish, 124 square miles. We have an average of about 100,000 customers as of last year. We also do water treatment, water reclamation, water, wastewater, natural gas, telecommunications. Because we're a municipality and wholly owned, it must be 7 o'clock. Because we are a municipality and wholly owned by the city, instead of for profits, we do what we call the GFT, or general fund transfer, and that helps to support all of the services of the city. So we account for about 30 to 35% of the general government's budget from that fund and transfer. A little bit about our history. Started in 1891 with purchase of Bulwer Springs to provide water for the citizens. And in 1906, free water was one of the things that brought University of Florida to Gainesville. They were actually looking to relocate, I believe, to Lake City. But the free water brought them to Gainesville, and I think that worked out for us. The electric utility started in 1912 as a result of a city streetlight dispute with the private electric company. He basically said, you know what, we don't want your services anymore, we'll start our own. So in 1914, they completed John R. Kelly Generating Station, which is still downtown. There's a picture there on the bottom right of what that original facility looked like. And I just think it's great. In the bottom left corner of that picture, there's like a Model T looking something there. It's pretty neat. But on that same site in 1930, we also began water treatment. So what does our generation look like? Right now, we've got about 300 megawatts of gas. We have the ability to do about 230 megawatts of coal. We've got 100 megawatts of biomass, about 24 megawatts of solar, and that is coming mainly from Solar Fit. We have landfill gas, which is about 1.6 megawatts, and we have a peak load of about 480 megawatts coming back from 2007. I'll move that down, 481 megawatts. On the left is our renewable energy report that we generate every quarter, and it was just published for fiscal year 23 with a total renewable percentage of around 30%. And if you look at that total compared to the rest of the state, we're well ahead. The average in the state is roughly 4% renewable energy. Generating stations, John R. Kelly went in service in 1914, as we talked about, 110 megawatts of combined cycle using natural gas. South Energy Center. I'm not sure if you can see me point on the screen, but this is the South Energy Center here. Just to help orient, this is Southwest Archer Road, Southwest 13th Street. This is UF Health and Original Shands Hospital, Children's Hospital. This is the cancer hospital here and the new, I'm going to mess it up, but neurovascular, cardiovascular, you know what that means. So effectively what we did was we partnered with UF Health on this campus, and they basically said, you know, we want to focus on healthcare. GRU, you focus on utilities. So we basically built this facility here that you see in this corner here, and it serves this entire south block. And we serve them with normal power, essential power, standby power. So all the red outlets in the hospitals are served by that building. Steam, chilled water, hot water, medical gas infrastructure, and also reclaimed water. Deer Haven Generating Station is next, is located north of Gainesville on US 441. First unit went in service at around 1972, able to create about 450 megawatts of power. Unit 1 and Unit 2, both primarily natural gas now. CTs 2 and 3 are 22 megawatts apiece, and then CT3 is 82 megawatts. And then there's Deer Haven Renewable. Again, located on another part of the site that Deer Haven is located, and on US 441, went commercial in December of 2013. Produces about 103 megawatts of renewable energy and uses woody biomass as a fuel. So when you look at operations of electrical grid, you have to start somewhere, and it starts with a load. So a load is the electrical demand or electrical requirement for the city of Gainesville. When you look at that, it varies all the time. It varies by season, it varies by time of day, it varies by special events. A Saturday looks different than a Wednesday. A football Saturday looks different than a regular Saturday. And so all of those have to be combined in what we call a load forecast. And that's how we meet our or forecast our generation need to know which units we're going to run and how we're going to meet that load most economically. It is never static. Some people think that the load curve is just a straight, smooth line, and it looks nothing like that when you look at it. We actually have to adjust every 6 seconds to generation and load because it changes that often. So I'm going to take you through very quickly some different load profiles. I'm going to take a look at a typical winter day. Now, I know winter is relative in Florida, right, in Gainesville. But I'm talking about a winter day, maybe in mid-January, you've got lows in the 30s, highs in the 60s or 70s, and your load forecast looks something like this. Load goes down in the early morning hours, okay? The load picks up as everyone starts to wake up. You've got cold temperatures, they're turning on heat, they're making breakfast, they're taking showers, they're doing all those things. So you hit a peak in the morning and it kind of dips off in the middle of the afternoon. Everyone goes to work, well, or works from home in this case. And then everyone kind of gets home at the same time in the evening, and you start making dinner and you take more showers and you start cleaning and you start watching your favorite TV show. So you see a little bump in the evening here on this curve. When you move to a spring day, again, it looks slightly different. Spring day, lows in the mid-50s, highs in the mid-70s. You'll see a dip in the morning, and there's a slow, gradual increase throughout the day, okay? Pretty mild outside, not a lot of AC load, but you do see some. And then you'll see this little bump here at the end. Again, same idea. Everybody's getting home at the same time, cooking dinner, turning on TVs, taking showers, getting ready for bed. Evening routines. Summer days look a lot different. And this curve basically happens day over day, end on end, from about May till about the first week in October. You'll see a decline until about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and then you'll see a steady peak, steady climb to a peak in the evening about 1900 or so in the afternoon, 2000. No bump here because it's just all AC electrical load, and it's all overcome by that. That's the main driver for a summer day. And then a fall day, something like today, you'll see very low temperatures in not very low, but lower temperatures. You see a slight peak in the morning, gradual climb, and then you'll see again that representative peak in the afternoon. Everyone's getting home, same routine. Now, those curves look very different when you stack them on top of each other, okay? You'll see that there's a spring day at the bottom, and you see the peak here of a summer day. You'll see the change from min to max of a summer day is roughly 200 megawatts. You'll see the change from min to max of a spring day is roughly 100 megawatts, right? And so when you look at those things, 75 to 100 megawatts. But when you look at an electric system, it has to be able to respond from this point, the lowest one, to the highest one. It has to be able to respond to that peak load at all times. So when we go to do these load forecasts, that determines which units we start. So based on how much capacity there is, how much units we have available, whether the unit is out for outage, how efficient that unit is. And so once you start those units, you have what we call an incremental cost to that. Think of an incremental cost as the amount of fuel it takes to make one more megawatt, okay? So if I'm sitting and making 100 megawatts and I need 101, there's a cost to that. And it's different depending on which unit you put that megawatt on. Same idea with a car, translating into miles per gallon, right? If I need to travel 100 miles, I'm going to use more fuel using an F-150 than I am using a Prius. Same concept with the generation units. So once those units are online, we use what we call incremental costs to decide which units we're going to load up first. So these numbers are completely made up, so don't take anything away from them. But if you look at the numbers here, if each one of these units is at a minimum and you need one more megawatt, the question becomes, well, the answer is there too because the slide messed up. Where do we get the next most economical megawatt? And that answer is CC1, because it's the lowest cost, right? So I will ramp up CC1 until I can't get any more energy out of it. But say I need more megawatts after that. What's the next unit that I load up?
Each one.
Again, it's not a trick question. So the answer is DH1, right? And so that's how we load our electrical system throughout the day. Lowest cost megawatts first until I max out. Next is the next cost effective unit until it maxes out. And then I hit my peak. So now my load is coming down. Which unit do I take a load off of first? The most expensive unit, and so forth and so on until I get again to the lowest cost. Yes,
Can I ask a detailed
absolutely.
question? How variable is that incremental cost across the different units? So for coal, natural gas, biomass. So, I mean,
So it's a factor of two things.
Mhm.
Most of your production cost, about 70%, comes from your fuel cost.
mhm,
The rest comes from the efficiency of the unit. Okay. So again, going back to an F-150 and a Prius, right? If I have something that is very efficient, and my fuel cost doesn't change, then my actual megawatt cost is not going to change. For instance, if I take this cost for CC1 and say that's the cost at that gas was 18 months ago,
mhm,
so it's 18, let's call it $15. Well, natural gas tripled from that time till today. So what happened to that cost of production? It tripled, right? So now instead of 15, it's 45. Okay,
mhm.
so it's that way across the board. It depends on the efficiency of the unit, and it depends on the price of the fuel that you're putting into it. The more volatility in the fuel, the more wild the swings would be on your production cost. The less volatile the swings. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I know you can't generalize completely, but in general, the fuel cost volatility, is it higher or lower for biomass compared to natural gas,
I can
for
answer that.
example?
I can answer that question.
Yeah.
So biomass has been almost rock solid since the day that we bought it.
Mhm.
It has been somewhere between $2.80 an M to right now, I think $3.50 an M. Okay. We do M, which is basically million BTUs, because it allows you to compare different fuels with different energy content. So you can now know which one is actually cheaper. Biomass is almost rock solid, right? Natural gas, as I said, more than tripled over the 18-month period. Coal followed suit with that because they used to be disjointed, but now they're not. They're really connected at the hip. And so the cost of coal tripled as well, more than tripled. And so we've had a lot of cost volatilities. And of course, everyone has heard in the news about, high bills and fuel adjustment and that kind of thing. Well, federal law says that we have to recoup our cost for the fuel. No more, no less. And so that fuel cost is a direct pass through. It takes away the ability for the utility to make a profit off of fuel in highly volatile times, right? So what it does is it really does protect the customer, but it does open them up to that volatility.
Thank you. That was,
Sure.
Eric, is biomass then your foundation fuel? Is that what you use first?
It is what we call a dispatchable fuel, and it is the foundation of our fuel mix today, right? If you asked me again 18 months ago, it was not,
Right.
because it was not the cheapest fuel out there.
Mhm.
We strictly go by economics at this point with a factor in of renewable. And so as we make that play, we have to be careful that if we're making that switch, that everyone knows why we're doing it, and the possible impact of that. So when you look today, or actually I'll take last week, CC1 and natural gas had come down to almost about $3 or $4 difference between the two of biomass. If you look 3 months before that, it was double that, the cost of biomass, right? So again, that volatility of the fuel has a major effect on what we pay for power.
And you showed us some profiles. Is GRU residentially loaded, or does commercial come in there and change that at all? When you were doing your presentation, you were speaking mainly about residential, and time you came home. Does commercial during the day, does that change very much? The profile?
That's a great question. Gainesville is very heavily leaning towards residential and commercial, very little heavy industrial. And the residential sector has much more impact on the load curve than even the commercial does. Commercial tends to be pretty flat, not a lot of variation, right? So it tends to be driven by residential mostly, commercial after that, and then heavy industry is the last driver or indicator.
Okay.
How quickly are you able to respond to these changing prices? You have to plan 6, 12, 18 months.
So we do it in a number of ways. We try to plan and forecast what the price will be. We've recently updated our hedging plan for fuel. It mostly consists of natural gas. And you can today go out and purchase gas in December of 2025 for a price because there's a market for that, right? What we can do is we can go out and place financial hedges on that. So in other words, we can cap our exposure during certain times of the year. As these prices started to go up about 18 months ago, we also implemented a new hedging plan where we're not looking only 12 months out, we're looking 36 months out now. So we tried to capture some of the outlooking prices where they were lower, place some hedges on those to limit the cost impact, and do it in a more systematic way. So we are layering on hedges at different times, at different points. And so as, let's call it December 2025 approaches, today, I may only be hedged 10%. As it gets closer and I'm 3 to 6 months out, I'm now hedged 60 to 70% of that volume for that month. So we're taking a more systematic approach to layer out and cap the cost and exposure and the volatility that we have and that customers see.
Okay. I don't know how much more you have in your presentation, but one of the questions that always comes up is how do you integrate solar into your present natural gas oriented fuel mix?
We'll talk a little bit about that. What we have now, we have 25 megawatts of solar fit. And so if you guys remember, that was a program that basically paid customers at a contracted rate for 20 years in exchange for them bringing on solar. It was an incentive that started, I want to say 2008, 2009, something like that. And so it produced about 25 megawatts of solar on the system. But that right now, for instance, we're paying roughly $250 a megawatt because they were early adopters of that program. You can buy solar and have it built and pay a PPA right now for much, much less than that. So sub $50. So there is a premium for being early adopters of that. That is not factored into our fuel forecast simply because the sun comes and the sun goes. It's really netted into our load projection. So our load forecast that we talked about is really net of that solar impact when we expect it to come. As that solar number goes up with the Origis deal that we talked about, the 50 megawatts, that load profile and that load shape will begin to change as well.
When it comes to solar, so it's mostly residential at this point? This new project is going to be larger?
It's
more
going to be
farm scale?
utility scale solar, correct?
Okay. Is it going to involve any kind of battery technology?
It
storage?
is.
Yeah.
The battery technology will be mainly to control the ramp rate of the solar. And I'll get into a little bit of why that's important here too.
I just a sort of separate question. I don't know how much you would know about, this is the Alachua County, so like other utilities, do they have mostly natural gas in terms of their main source of production, or is it coal? Or
the state of Florida is 75 to 80% natural gas.
Okay.
So the power production is mostly natural gas within the state.
Right.
You have large players that are moving in the solar realm, but because they're so large, they barely move the needle as far as output of production from solar. So for instance, in FPL, I believe a peak load is 28,000 megawatts. They have maybe 3,000 megawatts of solar. That's next to nothing on their system.
I was just gonna define the acronym you used for those who aren't familiar with it. A colleague of mine was actually the first person to participate in the feed-in tariff. So that's
Okay.
what FIT stands for feed-in
Yes.
tariff. And
Thank you.
he was the first in the country, actually. So just to note, GRU being an early adopter.
We were the
I mean,
first in
you
the
were,
nation.
yeah, so
Right.
it's fascinating.
And I'm
Yeah.
sorry if I do use acronyms. I talk this stuff all day. So if I use an acronym, please, and I don't explain myself, please feel free.
Okay, when you go ahead. Terry.
Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about regulatory requirements for the electric grid. Does anybody remember this picture? I distinctly remember this, and especially this picture of folks walking across the Brooklyn Bridge. If this was kind of a satellite look at the United States during the blackout that happened August 4th, 2003. Okay. As a result of that, this thing called NERC, this entity called NERC came about. Okay. A little bit of history. Back in 1965, there was another blackout in the Northeast, the first. And the National Electric Reliability Council was established by the electric industry. In 2002, NERC operating policy and planning standards became mandatory and enforceable in Ontario, Canada. And then the blackouts that we just saw occurred in the US, August 14, 2003, in the Northeast. That caused the federal government to take action. So the U.S. Energy Policy Act of 2005 created the Electric Reliability Organization. In 2006, FERC, which is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, certified NERC as that Electric Reliability Organization, all right, with the U.S. and some provinces of Canada. In 2007, that council became NERC as we know it, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. And that is where we begin when we move forward. So as NERC, they are authorized to coordinate efforts to improve physical and cybersecurity for the bulk electric system. The bulk electric system is anything 100,000 volts or above. So most of your transmission lines, long distance is covered by NERC, as well as anything that touches those lines, generators, breakers, so forth. Any protection that you have is covered by NERC. So every generator that we have in our system is covered by NERC except for one. They conduct detailed analysis, root cause analysis, uncover lessons learned for events. And by the way, that Northeast blackout event was basically caused by a lack of vegetation management on a line. So a line overloaded, all right, it tripped out. It caused a cascading effect to where the generator said, hey, I see a blip. I need to protect myself, so I'm taking myself offline. And you basically saw a cascade of power leave the electric system all within a matter of minutes. You had millions of people without power.
So let's clarify that. So when people think about it, we think about overloading, but it was not overloading. It was protection of the system. And that happens a lot with our local utility also, especially our local utilities. It's protection built in that sets things, not all the time overloading.
Correct. So when you look at most of the outages that we see on our distribution system are caused by squirrels. And they are jumping from phase to phase, and they're no longer squirrels, they're something else. But what takes out the customers is that protection.
Right.
It sees a fault and it says, I'm going to protect the rest of the system, so it disconnects itself.
Right. And
right?
birds,
Birds,
Yes.
correct. And so protection of the system is NERC's main focus. That is why they're here. Reliability of the system. That is their sole focus. So again, kind of a hierarchy of what's there. You have FERC, which created NERC, and NERC then goes down to the regional entities. The regional entities is a delegated function, right? So they do compliance monitoring, they do the standards development, they register all the entities, training and education, situational awareness, all those things come from the regional entities. There are currently 6 in the US. I won't read these, I'll actually show you the map, it's a little easier to see. So obviously we are here, Florida, we are part of CERC, and there's a lot of acronyms there. So Southeastern Regional Reliability Corporation, Reliability First, the Northeast Power Coordinating Council, the Midwest Reliability Organization. Texas is always on its own, they're on their own, and then WEC. So these are the regional entities that are responsible for reliability across the United States. All of these entities report up to NERC, and then NERC reports to FERC.
Quick question, is
Sure.
FERC, the Florida Regional FRRC, part of CERC? Did they merge at a certain point? Because I thought that.
So read this at this last bullet. FRCC was a separate
Thank you.
entity. They merged into CERC in July of 2019.
Thank you.
That's why it's formally 7, now 6.
Okay.
But FRCC does still exist as a member entity, an operational entity. So we do coordinating in subgroups in the state of Florida to help reliability, but official reliability oversight comes from CERC.
Thank you.
Okay.
What's the reliability standard that you're given? What
I'm going to get into just a little bit of that in a minute. This will help understand the volume that's out there. So it's the NERC standards are broken down into different areas. So for instance, BAL is resource and demand balancing, okay, of the electric grid. COM is communication. CIP, which you probably hear of in other places for cybersecurity, is critical infrastructure protection. And a lot of your cybersecurity rules fall under CIP. And you can see how many there are. If you look down on the right in the blue, there are roughly 1,600 unique requirements between all of these. And what you register as determines which one of these standards are applicable to you, right? GRU must comply with roughly 1,200 of those requirements. So of the 1,600, we have to comply with about 1,200 of them. So that has to do with training, that has to do with transmission operations, it has to do with generation and balancing, it has to do with maintenance, SIP, protection of the electric grid. All of those things are things that NERC says you must do and that we must comply with. And I have a question for the board. How many of these standards do you think mention cost?
0.
0. They don't care what it costs. Their only goal is reliability of the system. Okay, this the NERC creates balancing authorities, and so it's basically areas for which these authorities balance their power. And you can see it down here in Florida. There are roughly 10 balancing authorities, and that's going to be important as we move into the next point. We're going to talk about ACE, which is system balance. Okay, ACE stands for area control error. So the city of Gainesville and our electric territory is our balance authority. And so when you look at a system, you look at how balanced it is. We are connected to everyone else in the state. We are connected to Duke, and we're connected to FPL electrically. They are connected to a bunch of folks. The idea is that as one balance authority is balanced and the one next to it is balanced, if they're connected, then the grid remains balanced. If one of them goes out of balance, it threatens the rest of the grid because they're all connected. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at ACE, it's really, when you boil it down, there's a whole equation that I took out. But when you boil it down, it's your generation or purchase power, right? minus what your system load is. And your goal is for ACE to be 0. So you have a demand where you have load, you have power sales, you have supply where you have generation, you have purchases, you have solar that goes into this bucket. And batteries can go either way, depending on what you're doing with it, right? It can either be a supply if you're low, or it can be a demand if you're charging that battery. So they can go in either bucket. But the idea is that ACE is equal to 0 in that balancing area. So all of the load in Gainesville, the supply must meet the demand. If that ACE is negative, then you need to generate more power. If that ACE is positive, then you need to generate less power.
How often do we read it?
Once every 2 seconds. And it changes every 2 seconds. I've been doing this for about 8 years, this particular part of my job. I've seen it at 0, maybe 10 times in 8 years. And it's very brief. Okay, so we've talked about ACE. Now let's talk about some of the standards that we have to comply with. I'm not going to read this. I'm not going to make you read this. All right, but we understand ACE and balance. What happens is basically we have what we call the most severe single contingency. In other words, you can take a guess what that means. The most severe thing that can take you out and put the system at risk. Most of the time, it is your largest generating unit or largest power source. What the standards say is you have to have that recovered within 15 minutes and 30 minutes if you're a part of the reserve sharing group. So effectively what happens is if you lose your largest generating unit, you have to be able to replace it within 30 minutes somehow, some way. They don't tell you how to, they just tell you have to do it, okay? So when you look at an MSSC, let's look at this scenario really quick. You have a load of 300 megawatts. You have 110 on one unit. You have a power purchase of 150 megawatts on the tie line or connection that you have to the grid. And you have 40 megawatts on unit 1. That's your 300 megawatts. What is your most severe single contingency? Again, not a trick question.
Power purchase.
It's the power purchase because it's your single largest source of generation of how you're supplying your power. Now, let's take a look at the other side. You have standby generation or available generation on the side that equals to 115 megawatts. In other words, those are the things that can start up very quickly and meet that demand within 30 minutes. So you have 115 megawatts of that. Can you recover your most severe single contingency?
No.
No, you can't, right? So what does that mean? I've got to remove some generation off of my power purchase line and put it somewhere else, right? And so that is also part of the requirement when you're balancing the grid is you can't put all of your eggs in one basket. In other words, you cannot load up one generating unit to meet your entire load and have no plan to replace that one generating unit if you lose it. In this case, it's only 150 megawatts, right? But if I don't have a viable plan to replace it, then I'm putting myself and the system at risk. And if I knowingly do that, then that's when NERC gets mad and they come after you.
How do they come after you? Do you pay a penalty?
Yes. So for instance, if an event happened and I lost my T line and I couldn't recover, and I ended up having to shed load, right? Shedding load means disconnecting customers. So my demand matches my supply. That is a NERC recordable event because I knowingly shed load. I have to report that. Once I report that to NERC or CERC, actually, they report it to NERC. Then they come and start investigating. Well, why did that happen? And then they start investigating, well, how much available generation did you have? Oh, you only had 115 megawatts, but you had a load of 150. Why didn't you do something different? Knowingly not adjusting and not planning and not saying anything, then they come back and they can fine you up to $1 million per day per incident. So they will levy fines based on your level of compliance and or ignorance.
Fine you personally or find your GRU?
GRU.
Has GRU ever been fined?
I remember one small fine. I I think it was back in 2014 of maybe 40,000. And it was something to do with a policy that that we rewrote, but did not quite follow to the letter. Very little risk, so the fine was small. But there have been other entities that have been fined 10, 15, $20 million that have been negotiated down from higher numbers because of negligence. They knew there was a problem, but did nothing to address it.
I don't want to, but I think one thing we're headed toward is saying that for all the solar that we have, we have to have a way to back it up. Okay.
Yes. We'll get to that too. Okay. So this one is called basically balancing real power balancing control. Okay. Not going to make you read it, but the takeaway from this is in red at the bottom that you can't overgenerate or undergenerate for more than 30 consecutive clock minutes. So in other words, your ACE can't be positive for 30 minutes straight. As soon as you hit 30 minutes of overgeneration, you're in trouble. If it's less than 0 or you're undergenerating for 30 minutes consecutively, then you're in trouble. It is recordable. So what that forces you to do is control your supply to your demand as closely as possible, right?
Is storage, does it factor in at all?
No.
Okay.
So
Storage
you can,
capacity at a utility scale, I mean.
correct, at a utility
Right.
scale, you can use it as a load.
Mhm.
Storage can, but obviously there's a peak to how much you can store and at what times, right? What this is meant to do is keep people from saying, oh, I don't have enough generation. I'm only 20 megawatts short. I'm just going to drag on the system for today, for the next hour or 2 hours until I can get something back online. Or it prevents someone from saying, man, I've got a lot of solar online. I'm over generating by 50 megawatts. I'm just going to leave it alone. I'm just going to push it out to the system. It prevents folks from doing that because the idea is, again, balance.
Mhm.
So when you do that, you're creating a problem for another network that's connected to yours.
Exactly.
As power is going out in the system, you're not sucking it off for your customers. And so Duke has to deal with where does power come from? We have to figure out a place to put it. So that's where the penalties are applied, right? Okay.
Correct.
Very good. Thank you.
So for GRU, we're a small system. Duke probably won't feel it. But if Duke does that, I'm going to feel it and everyone around it.
Do you know if the 2019 move to absorb where FERC became part of CERC, was that to benefit CERC or to benefit Florida? Because we were essentially like Florida was its own reliability coordinating council basically prior to 2019. So was that to benefit the reliability for Florida? Do you have?
It was to remove conflicts of interest within the state.
Okay.
FRCC contracted with Florida Power and Light to be the reliability coordinator. The reliability coordinator is responsible for the stability of each one of those areas. So you've got the largest utility in the state that is responsible for the reliability of the state. And then the state FRCC is contracting with them to do that. So there could be some conflicts of interest there. It was basically said, we're going to remove that conflict of interest, absorb you into a larger entity, and make sure that no one can say, hey, something's not right, or have FPL, not to say that they would do this, but skew the odds in their favor. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about solar. So solar, as you can imagine, has a huge impact on your ACE because it changes so quickly in some cases. People consider the state of Florida the sunshine state. But if you look at the actual data, there's about 240 days out of the year where it's partly cloudy in the state of Florida. That means that this output of solar is not steady. It is actually variable. So what we did was we took one of our solar fit fields, which you see down here at the bottom in blue, and this is an actual output from an actual day of that solar field. Okay, it was in, I don't remember, July 16th, 2019. So it was the middle of the summer. What we did was we scaled it up to 50 megawatts, right? What if that 1 megawatt was actually 50 and had the same kind of load profile? Okay. And so what you get here is really kind of this green line, or the gray line here, right? So when you look at that, the orange is your load forecast. If you scaled up to 50 megawatts, you get this gray line in the middle, right? Here's the variation between the two. So in other words, instead of load, this is the difference between load and generation here, okay? If it's 50 megawatts. If it's 100 megawatts, now the difference between this orange line and the yellow line of solar. And that is what you have to make up in real time, because you can't overgenerate or undergenerate for more than 30 minutes, right? And you also have to, again, plan on the loss of your largest unit at that same time. So what this does is it adds variability and intermittency to your system. Intermittency is the enemy of reliability, right? Because you can't plan on it.
And that was just for that one day,
Correct.
and it could vary in every day.
Every day. So roughly 240 days out of the year, you'd see a load curve over an output from solar like that blue line. Very rarely do you see it actually smooth and straight. Everybody's heard of the duck curve, right? Okay, this is really where it comes from. And this is a graph out of California, right? You see the load here in 2012, you see the load in 2013, and then as your solar comes online, your load curve reduces like you see here, and it looks like the back of a duck. Except, remember we talked about those load curves and the peaks in the afternoon? Guess when the peak of solar is? It's right in the middle of the day. Does it help contribute to the peak load of need? Almost none. It's almost 100% gone by the time you hit your peak over here. So it creates what we call this duck curve. It looks kind of like a duck, right? And so again, reliability wise, I've pushed down my need for power in the middle of the day, but I've increased it at the end of the day. Well, what does that mean for the rest of my generation? I've now got to take something off for reliability purposes because I can't leave it on, but I've got to ramp it up and turn it back on quickly in the evening. And that's every day, right? So there's this, I'm going to get on my little soapbox and I'm going to put it away. There's this idea that solar is the answer to all of the renewable energy, climate change issues for meeting power purchases. It is not. It exacerbates the problem, right? Because it adds instability to the system. GRU has been, there's some conceptions that we're anti-renewable, anti-solar, moving things towards climate change. We're not. We want to see that too. We want to be responsible with the things that we have, right? But then you've got to look on the flip side of we have NERC and these reliability standards that we have to meet, and they haven't budged, and there's no looking at budging from those. So I've got to balance all of this intermittency with all of these regulatory requirements, and sometimes they just don't match. And so there has to be, again, a responsible way to do that. You talked about firming power for the intermittency, and that's exactly what we need to do. Is the more solar that we bring on, the more firming power we have to bring on with it, because it removes that variability. It allows us to stay compliant, but it also allows us to take advantage of some of these renewable energy resources that we have.
Sorry, what did you say? Firming power? What was that?
Firming power.
What does that mean?
It means synchronous generation, effectively. Dispatchable generation that I can control. Ramp
Yeah,
up and
so
down.
something that's easier to ramp up quickly, like
Correct.
natural gas. Backup power. So battery technology is often what's used to smooth curves in renewable energy all over the place, because renewable energy does rely primarily on the sun and its effects. So does GRU in this new project that you guys are going to or are thinking about building, is that you mentioned that was like a component that you were going to use to try to smooth that curve?
So that is not to smooth the curve. It is to slow down the variations, right? Right. So here's an idea. Every generator that we have on the system can ramp at 3 megawatts a minute. So it can change a total of 3 megawatts from minute to minute. Solar can ramp anywhere from 7 to 10 megawatts a minute. Okay. As that ramp increases, I get further and further behind because my generation cannot keep up with it. What this battery does is it changes that ramp rate from 7 megawatts a minute and it keeps it at 3, so I can keep up with it, right? Going up or going down. And so that's the idea behind the power. It's not to smooth out the curve. You will still see these variations. It'll just lessen the slope of those changes.
Right,
That makes
yeah,
sense.
yeah, definitely, yeah. Makes sense.
And so you mentioned battery technology. We're going to talk a little bit about that later as well. But here's when you take away the duct, basically, you'll need an additional 13,000 megawatts in 3 hours to meet that load that you need. This again is from California, but the load shape doesn't vary much across the nation, right? So talking about solar impact to ACE. So current technology, intermittency must be balanced. We've talked about that. We've talked about high ramp rates. We talked about inverters and limitations on VAR support and harmonics. There's large land requirements for it right now, utility scale, between 5 and 6 acres per 1 megawatt of solar. Geographic diversity is desired. Again, 240 days out of the year is partly cloudy, but if I spread some of those out, then maybe I have less of an impact of them all ramping down or ramping up at the same time. Okay. And then the inability to call for reserves. I didn't talk a lot about reserves, but effectively what happens is in the state of Florida, we all band together. And if one person uses a unit, the rest kind of ramp up their generation incrementally to cover it, right? So that the whole state stays balanced. You can only do that for 30 minutes, but you can only call for reserves for a synchronized generator. If I lose solar, I cannot call for reserves. I have to meet that load and recover from that internally, okay? And so that's with the current technology, and we'll talk a little bit about batteries. The current lithium battery technology that is out there, that is prevalent for what's being used, it is fast responding. The costs are decreasing, but they're still relatively high. You have 2 to 4 hour storage, right? So again, you've got the idea of moving to net zero. How do we maximize that? This current battery technology doesn't get us through the night. Even if we store up all day, you'll get 2 to 4 hours of storage from that. It's a relatively short life cycle, so you must either overbuild it, right, or constantly replace them, which again continues to add cost, and then the potential safety risk. Now, there are some upcoming flow battery technologies that have a longer duration of 8 to 10 hours. Now we're talking about getting through the night. Now we're talking about really shifting that power somewhere else, right? You've got reduced safety risk, but the thing is, it's still in its infancy. There's not a lot of utility scale projects that are out there. It's a higher cost than lithium, but again, folks are doing a lot of research and pilots to drive that cost down. This is what we need to help move us along. We need this technology to develop more, right? And that's kind of not the wish and the hope, but realizing allowing technology to develop will also help us later down the road. We've also got reciprocating internal combustion engines, or RICE. They're a quick start and quick ramp rates. And they actually allow more intermittent renewable energy. Again, firming power, because you can respond and back up to when you lose or have those high ramp rates. They're efficient across a lot of the operating range, and they are compatible. They're being built and designed now with next gen fuels like hydrogen, like renewable natural gas, biogas, those kind of things. And so again, right now we have 2 options for firming here in the state of Florida. It's really RICE or some kind of fast start technology, or batteries. So those are really the 2 that we have. So the development of technology again is going to be important as we move towards that net zero goal.
Eric, we got about
10 minutes.
yeah.
Okay.
And we have some people online that we're gonna have to open it up to public. But if you can just
I'm
kind
going
of sum it
to
up
speed
for us.
through. We're moving. All right. So planning, we do IRPs, an integrated resource plan. It's a comprehensive plan that recommends what we do next and how we meet that generation load. Effectively, graphically, an IRP answers this question. So the black line is your projected load. You have a 15% adder on top of that required by the state planning. As you retire units and lose generation, you create a gap. The IRP answers, how do you fill that gap with generation, solar, imports, whatever it is. 10-year site plan. 10-year site plan is not an IRP. It's simply a planning tool for the Florida Public Service Commission. All right, it's an annual requirement for all utilities with 250 megawatts or more of generation, or a utility that's planning to build 75 megawatts within the next 10 years. The primary purpose for a 10-year site plan is to ensure that utilities have adequate generation. There's no requirement or binding aspect to a 10-year site plan. All you have to do is provide 30 days written notice to change your 10-year site plan, and there's no penalty for that. So it's simply an adequacy measure for the state. We don't report anything on the 10-year site plan that's either not existing or approved by the city commission. Okay, so we don't report aspirational things. We don't report things we'd like to do. We report things that we've been approved for or that we're currently working on. Okay, let's move on. Compare and contrast between the two. 10-year site plan is to assess resource adequacy. The IRP is a strategic study of generation and options. Periodicity is annual for 10-year site plan and as needed as an IRP. Only the 10-year site plan is required by Florida law, and neither one bounds you to its contents. So we're coming up on an IRP. We're going to do something a little different. We're going to have a community engagement portion to our outreach, okay, to our IRP. The last one was really full inward facing without that community engagement. This one, we're actually going to hire a third party to help us do that community engagement to make sure that we're getting feedback from the entire community. This new IRP will have a 2045 net zero resolution as its base case, and everything will be compared to that. We're going to update pricing, technologies, particularly energy storage, as we talked about before. We're also going to include demand side management and conservation. And the term will be 25 years. And that's important because the current biomass plant is set to retire in 2043. That's 2 years before 2045. So if we have to replace that, you could be talking about 2 biomass plants to meet that goal. We are learning from other customers that are doing that. Basically, timeline is 12 to 14 months for IRP. There was a question about munis versus IOUs, so we'll talk a little bit about that very quickly. An IOU is a private for-profit electric distributor of power, and it issues stocks to shareholders. Okay. A municipal is a not-for-profit utility owned and operated by the local government or governing body. So GRU is owned by the city of Gainesville, so we're a municipality. Cooperatives are private nonprofit utilities owned and governed by the customers it serves. All right. Co-ops actually cover most of the United States. They're typically found in rural areas. They account for about half of the distribution wires in terms of miles, and they cover about 75% of the US and landmass. So to give you an idea, on the left are municipal customer counts. The largest one is Puerto Rico with about 1.4 million. The next largest is Los Angeles, Department of Water and Power with about the same. They've got about 20,000 customers difference. On the right side is the IOUs. The largest one in the US is Florida Power and Light with 5.1 million customers. The next one is Southern Cal Ed, which has about 4 million customers. And so you can see there are huge disparity between the two as far as customers go, but they effectively try to serve the same purpose. Again, a comparison left and right, number of entities versus customers that they serve. So investor-owned, there's 168 entities, but they serve 110 million customers across the US. And going down the road, there's a lot of publicly owned utilities, almost 2,000, but they only serve about 24 million customers over the entire US. Differences. All right, control of rates for municipal is local board, city commission. For IOUs, it's the Public Utility Commissions, or PSC in this case. They determine budget, rates, expansion, all of those things. Capital funding, we have access to municipal bonds, where private has to go to the market to get private capital. And the benefits, there's more local reinvestment with municipals, lower customer bills on average, and quicker adaptation because there's less regulation for rates and budgets and so forth. But IOUs have a lot deeper pockets, and so they can push development, technologies, and economies of scale, right? Just some tidbits down there at the bottom for local versus IOU. And I think that's it.
So your municipals don't have to report to the Public Service Commission?
Are there any federal or state incentives that you know about that this committee could help assist in terms of finding resources to help GRU find, like, implement better technology or whatever?
So we are looking into grants just like everyone else.
Yeah,
IIJA, we're looking into that. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, we're looking into those.
Right.
What we don't want to do is go out and get money that we have to make a project to then fund. We want to look at where we're going and then go find funding sources for that. So we've got a few consultants that we have on staff or on contract that are helping us go through these things and help hone in on what we're going to go after. The sustainability group has the purpose with grants of giving priority to what we're going to do and go after for utility, and then working with the other resources to go get those. So in short, we are looking for it, but all the help we can get would be welcome.
Thank you.
What is the, and you know, we really thank you for this. This has been real thorough. Bottom line, for your 2045, what is the fuel mix you're looking to have?
We're gonna have solar. We're gonna have natural gas. And we're looking at battery technology. The reason is there is no other transitional fuel source right now other than natural gas.
Mhm.
We can't build enough batteries. We can't build enough solar and still meet our regulatory requirements. So as this technology develops, it allows us to transition to some of those things, right? But the technology is just not there. It's still in its infancy in the scale that we need, right? So we are doing things where another thing that my group is tasked with is electric vehicles and how do we prepare and incentivize the growth of those. So we'll be developing an electric vehicle plan to incentivize Gainesville to transition. We're looking at rooftop solar. How do we incentivize that to bring more of it on the system? The idea is that our system is built for power to flow one way. If it flows the other way, especially quickly, it causes problems. So we have to be prepared for that. That's another thing that my group is looking at. How do we prepare our system for that? So there are things we're working on in parallel to help with the transition to renewable energy and help with the electrification. It's just that technology is not there on the scale that we need on the generation side.
So the 2045 plan will still be predominantly looking at natural gas.
As a transition fuel for this iteration. So when we go, the thing is with IRPs, you're not supposed to make them and then sit them on the shelf for 25 years. So every 3 to 5 years, we're going to pick it back up and redo the exercise. So 3 to 5 years from now, maybe there's a breakthrough in that technology that allows us to do something different quicker, right?
Okay. Any other questions?
Are these slides available anywhere?
I could send them to you,
That'd be awesome.
or I'll send them to Steve.
Or in the Dropbox, yeah.
Could I will make a brief question
Sure.
about the role of increased energy efficiency? What would be the role of improving energy efficiency, let's say, of homes in Gainesville to help sort of take the peak off of that evening, for example, if you were reducing the amount of energy that's actually used when people come home, turn on the lights, turn on the heat, turn on the air conditioning, would that help with this process of balancing?
Absolutely. So that's one of the things we're considering as well. Is demand side management is one of the things that we're considering. And so the idea though, or the problem is how much do we expect from that demand side management to reduce that peak? Is it 1%? Is it 3%? Is it 5%? We don't know. So we're actively engaging consultants to help us understand that. So when we run the IRP, we know what that looks like.
One of the things that really, I think, hurts your load there is the fact that it's not a peaking load. It doesn't have a big peak to it that industrial will give it. It's more of that residential, commercial load that's kind of flat. And it, we're in, large cities are Miami, Orlando, we have a lot of industry. So you can have, on peak and off peak rates where GRU tend not to have that.
As we transition to EVs though, those on peak and off peak rates are gonna become important because we're gonna incentivize people to charge at night to bring some of those valleys up and help all around, right?
Okay. Well, thank you so much.
This has been great.
Thank you. That was so helpful.
All right. Steve, we have some other things on the agenda, and I'm looking at our time. So staff updates.
Yeah, I don't think we have a lot of, Eric, you can come back up if you have any updates. I was just gonna remind everyone that the Joint Water and Climate Policy Board meets December 12th, which is the week before your next meeting. So if anyone has an interest in that, John, you may be interested in presenting an update of the plan to the board too. So that's something we can talk about. So if we'll try to give you I'll let you know what's going to be on that agenda. So you guys will have that information should you want to be
Is that a
available.
Monday?
Yes.
Yes.
It's a Monday morning. I don't know if you know that, but they meet at 9:30, I believe, Monday mornings.
Okay.
So, that's the only update I had, other than I'm working with the attorneys to get a sunshine law presentation for you at the next meeting. Hopefully that could be like a 20-minute thing or so. And, the other one is to initiate some planning discussion for the summit at the next meeting in December. I think sounds like we're all itching to go on that. So that's all I had. And I guess we introduce Jenny Ford. She's our latest City of Gainesville representative.
Okay, great. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Jenny Ford. I'm the new environmental coordinator for the City of Gainesville. I guess the main update is that I'm just starting, and then we are looking for a chief climate change officer for the city. So I think it's been out for about 25 days, but it won't be filled until someone takes the job. So if anyone needs a job, it's open.
All right, and Eric, we thank you again for that very, very thorough presentation.
It's the questions also.
Yeah.
No, that was
Yeah,
fantastic.
that was
I'm
great.
such a nerd and that was just like,
Yeah.
I could listen to you on for hours.
Okay, we're looking at suggestions for our next regular meeting. We have 3 things down there. Any questions about those or anything that'd like to be added?
Just with that last bullet we added to our goals about assigning a point of contact for each committee. Maybe as members, we kind of look and think where we would want to support, and so we can discuss that next time.
Okay, and we can actually do that, and we can actually coordinate with Steve on some of those also.
And we would have to coordinate through Steve, right? If we are to say, oh, I want to take care of this, rather than, me talk to you about it or something,
Exactly.
right? Okay.
It'd be good to have it as an agenda item
Yeah.
for next month.
Yeah.
I had one other update I meant to share related to our last meeting. I had committed to reaching out to the Civic Extension Program, and I attended their most recent meeting last week and kind of planted the seed about getting assistance. The person here in Alachua County who would probably fill that role was not at the meeting. So I need to follow up with an email regarding how they might be able to assist with the summit and or other community engagement work around climate.
Now, you had them on the list. You don't anticipate you having that person available for December?
To come present in December. I can still invite them. this person was on vacation last week, so I can send an email. I could say tomorrow, but I don't know if that will happen. This week, I could send a formal invitation.
Stephen, I think there have been some discussion about seeing how the Inflation Reduction Act might be applicable to the community. And I know we had discussed that at the last meeting. I think we were gonna have a presentation or something on that.
We're gathering information, but I don't have a presentation plan for
Okay.
that.
Okay, so the three items to also to include the selection of tasks that you can kind of give us an update when people come to you, Steve.
Okay.
All right, meeting recap.
So I have that Stephen's gonna put together an outline for the summit output, the general timeline, and a basic requirements to get that organized. I've also have that you were gonna present the work plan at that joint water policy board.
Either I will or the chair or a representative from the
Okay.
committee. Typically, the committee representative for the committee would present the plan. If that doesn't work, I could probably do that with some bullet points.
And then the last one is just that everyone will take into consideration the goals for this upcoming year and think to themselves which ones they might be comfortable taking on as a responsibility.
Should we email those to Stephen prior to the next meeting? Would that make the next meeting more efficient?
We can, if you know and have an idea of what you would like, then we can do that. But we want to make sure that it gets balanced, so
Mhm.
we can do that. Jackie. All right. Steve, we can move on to public comment.
Yep, there are people. It looks like there's no public left in the room, but there may be someone online. Let me ask if they could, if you're online, if you can raise your hand online, let me know whether you want to speak. I'll allow them to speak. I know Sue Blythe wanted to talk, but I'm not sure if she's one of the people on there because their names aren't showing up.
We can see them on the screen. Yeah. Looks like there's one hand.
There's someone, a Alachua County spiritual assembly that's.
Yes, I'm sorry, can't change my name. This is Sue Blythe, and I am here with the Interfaith Climate Group and the Climate Collaboratory. We're in the third year of a pilot project that many of you know about. Started with the Sustainable Floridians at UF IFAS. And so we've been developing this with young people in many different organizations. And I'm just offering it as a way to support the outreach into the community and hopefully for the climate summit. So I'd like to read an article that was recently published in the Gainesville Sun. The Earth's equilibrium has been upset. What would it take for the human family to restore the balance of nature that has sustained human civilization for 10,000 years? Some say we can use technologies available today to stop emitting carbon pollution and sequester excess CO2. Others say it would take a miracle. I like to think that we're living in a time of miracles, scientific and spiritual, where all things are possible. And I want our children to believe that. So I have a story to tell. Just for a moment, let your imagination take you away from this turbulent time of social, political, and environmental discord to the year 2030, just 8 years from now. Imagine the celebration when the people of the world achieve the global goals agreed upon in 2015 by the United Nations. The goals include taking care of the environment, improving people's health and well-being, and making sure everyone is treated fairly. Imagine the human family on a road to healing and wellness. Children's songs and games highlight a joyful celebration of life on Earth, our home. Now imagine it's the year 2050. The human family lives in harmony with the natural world. The climate crisis has been averted. We are one human family and one Earth community with a common glorious destiny, as foretold by prophets and seers through the centuries. The grandchildren of that day will want to know about the spiritual transformation that took place in the first half of the 21st century. They'll learn how young people called for urgent climate action because their future depended on it. Now imagine yourself on Earth Day in the year 2023, just a few months from now. In Alachua and surrounding counties, individuals, organizations, and institutions share stories of what they are doing for the betterment of the world. They announce activities to support the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. People of faith and goodwill are building community in a changing climate, responding to the climate emergency. Throughout the year, children invite people of all ages to cooperate, collaborate, and co-create solutions for a livable planet. Together, they inspire peace on and with the earth. Of course, this vision is only in our imaginations. What would it take to make it a reality? What if we pool the human, material, and spiritual resources available right here in Alachua County and the surrounding counties in November 22? Maybe, just maybe, we could contribute to a world that works for all living things. That's 100% of humanity and the community of life on Earth, our home. So that's my story, and I want to offer it to all of you as a tool for helping with this community outreach. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sue. And I'm very familiar with your work and have worked with you, and you have presented this to many of our youth groups. And we're working to have you present that story also within our school district. So thank you. And we would really like to take that as a goal. And I think that that's the desire of all of us. And it's just working through that plan. And one of that plan is to come up with our strategic plan that we're going to present to the commissioners. And we would love to have that outcome that you talked about being the result of work that we've done. It's just a matter of doing the hard work now.
That's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, and thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
Thanks, Sue.
Do we have anybody else, Steve? Okay. Any closing remarks from the team?
Welcome aboard, everybody.
Nice to meet everybody.
All right, well, thank you, and thanks, everybody. And again, Eric, thank you for that very detailed and knowledgeable presentation.